Okay, so in Moodle, this is listed as Chapter 8. It's the food safety management systems. Okay, so what is a food safety management system? It's our group of practices and procedures that are intended to prevent foodborne illness. So we're going to actively control the risks and hazards throughout the flow of food. Everybody remember the steps in the flow of food? Where do we start? Start with purchasing, and then what happens? It is not preparation. We receive the food, put it into storage, then you can prep it, and then you cook it. You might cool it down and reheat it later, or you might go right into service. Okay, so each one of those we have looked at risks and hazards throughout the flow of food. So there are 8 things in the foundation of food safety management system. First is a personal hygiene program. Okay, the biggest part of that is going to be how and when do employees wash their hands. And that also includes reporting illnesses to the employer. A food safety training program. So you will have to train your employees to handle the food safety within your, or safely within your operation. Some larger restaurants will pay for their employees to go take this class somewhere. Anybody know how long the certificate in this class is good for? 5 years. Yeah, so. Supplier selection and specification program. So we're going to make sure that we use approved reputable suppliers. We're going to specify exactly what we want to get from them. A quality control and assurance program. So make sure that we're checking the quality all the way through the flow of food, not just when it's going out to the guest. Cleaning and sanitation program. How are we going to clean everything? We haven't talked about all the different chemical sanitizers yet. Standard operating procedures. You need to have standards in place. So restaurants, the biggest example of setting standards is having written recipes. Facility design and equipment maintenance program. So just like if you have a car, you got to put gasoline in it. You've got to have the check the pressure on your tires, check the oil, and have that changed on a routine basis. All of the equipment in your kitchen also needs to be maintained and checked. You don't want to wait until it breaks and then you can't use it anymore. We haven't gone into pest control programs yet, but that's definitely part of the food safety systems. So, you can remember back to chapter 1, we talked about purchasing food from unsafe sources as being one of the 5 common risk factors for foodborne illness. Failing to cook food adequately. So if you don't take it to the correct minimum internal temperature. So anybody, what is the, if we're cooking hamburgers, what's the minimum internal temperature? It's not 165, it's 155. holding food at incorrect temperatures. So that would be anywhere within the temperature danger zone, which is 41 to 135, 135. Okay, using contaminated equipment. And then employees practicing poor personal hygiene. So not washing their hands when they need to and not reporting illnesses when they need to. So ways that we can achieve active managerial control, this whole overarching plan. Have training programs in the operation. It's important to have manager supervision, to keep an eye on what's going on, to make sure everybody has their mask over their nose. Please put your mask over your nose. If you refuse to do it, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the classroom. Have earphones on? You can put your mask. If you're listening to something else, you need to take that out. Okay, so standard operating procedures for everything. You need to have like a system for what does the person do when they first walk in the morning. A HACCP program. We're going to go into detail about what a HACCP program is today. So steps for identifying active managerial control. And HACCP is one of the active managerial control options. You want to identify and document potential risks and ways to control or eliminate them. Monitor critical activities. So what could possibly go wrong with these menu items? Correct improper procedures or behaviors. So if you see something that's being done incorrectly as a manager, you have to take that corrective action. You also have to verify that your procedures that you have in place, that they are all followed. Ensure employees are trained and retrained as necessary. You'll find that when you start working in the kitchen, you're going to be a lot more focused on how you're holding your knife than whether or not your cutting board was sanitized. Just because that's what's your main goal, but you always have to have sanitation in your mind in the kitchen. Periodically assess the system to make sure it is working. So go through, check to make sure that you are keeping your food rotated in the proper order. Check temperatures. Okay, so Food and Drug Administration has public health interventions. These are recommended for controlling risk factors for foodborne illness. The manager has to show a demonstration of knowledge about how to keep food safe. You have to have staff health controls in place. So you have to have a record of you telling the employees what illnesses and symptoms they need to report and have them sign paperwork, keep that in the files. Manager has to know how to control hands as a vehicle of contamination, what policies to have in place, when to change gloves, when to use tongs, what all their options are going to be. Time and temperature parameters for controlling pathogens. Typically, food can stay in the temperature danger zone for how long? 4 hours, and then you got to throw it out, typically. Consumer advisories, so if you're serving raw or undercooked foods, TCS foods. Okay, so a specific program is called HACCP. It stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. It identifies the significant steps through the flow of food that your food could be exposed to biological, chemical, and physical hazards. And we're going to focus on the most critical of these. So we're going to work on preventing, eliminating, or reducing these hazards to safe levels. Most of it has to do with bacterial growth. Okay. If we have a HACCP system here, like we do for using the cryovac machines and storing cooking food in the sous vide method, it's going to be different from that if the employee, not the employee, but the dining room on campus has a HACCP plant or any other restaurant, because it's going to be unique to the equipment and recipes that we're doing here. Okay, so there are 7 HACCP principles. The first one is to conduct a hazard analysis, determine your critical control points, establish critical limits. Oftentimes that's temperatures that the food has to be held at or cooked to. Establish monitoring procedures. We're going to go through a couple examples. Let's identify corrective actions, verify that the system works, and then have record keeping and documentation on hand to show that you've gone through all of this. So we have a menu and salads and cold sandwiches. We can identify the critical points as being preparation and service of salads and cold sandwiches. For grilled chicken sandwiches and burgers, we can also include the cooking as a critical point. For things like chilies, soups, sauces, prep, cook, holding, cooling, reheating, and serving all could be critical control points. So for each TCS item that we have on our menu, we have to determine where hazards are likely to occur for each one. So it may be one or more of these points in any one of the processes. So determine those points and the points in the process where identified hazards can be prevented, eliminated, or reduced to safe levels. And these are called CCPs, critical control points. So when we're making the chicken sandwich, we identify the cooking as the critical control point. Okay. There could be more than one, but in this case, the way we know we can avoid the main cause of foodborne illness with chicken is to cook it to the proper temperature. So we are confident that that's going to be our only critical control point. Okay, so for each one of these control points, we have a minimum or maximum limit. So those limits have to be met to prevent or eliminate the hazard or reduce it to a safe level. So in the photograph here, they've got a clock with 16 minutes. And so if we have our grill set at a certain temperature, our typical chicken breast is going to reach 165 degrees in 16 minutes. But we're still going to have to take the temperature of it. It just depends that the time is right. So all of these grills and kitchen equipments have hot spots and cold spots. Some may cook more quickly. Some areas may take longer. So the real critical limit would be 165 degrees internal temperature. Establish monitoring procedures. The best way to check the critical limits. I'm going to have an instant read thermometer where we can get the internal temperature quickly. You'll be doing this next semester in the skills class. Make sure they're consistently met. Identify who it is that's going to monitor the temperatures and how often they're going to do it. And then corrective actions. Okay, what steps are going to be taken when a critical limit is not met? So if we check the chicken breast and it's 150 degrees, our corrective action is to put it back on the grill until it reaches 165. You want to have these planned for all of the differences that there could be. But in this case, it's either reached 165 or it hasn't. Verify that the system works. So we're going to keep records, checking the times that the chicken breast was checked. Evaluate the plan. Make sure that it's working, keeping monitoring charts, records, and like a consistent hazard analysis in case there's some type of new danger that pops up associated with chicken. Determine if your plan reduces, prevents, or eliminates your identified hazards. So what we're concerned about is salmonella, of course. So if we don't have reports of people getting sick with salmonella from eating our chicken, then our system is working. You really don't ever want to have anybody get sick from your food. And then we need documentation. We need to keep files on our monitoring activities. So in this case, taking the temperatures, corrective actions whenever we had to put chicken back on the grill, validating equipment, making sure that our thermometers are accurate, making sure that our grill temperature is accurate, working with our suppliers, making sure that we continue to get in the same quality of supply that we had specified. So all of these things we keep folders on. So another example is a restaurant called the Fruit Basket. The fruit-only operation known for its signature item, the melon medley salad. So analyze hazards for the melon medley salad. And what do we know as far as melons are concerned? What's a danger? Pardon me? It could be thieves. Once it's cut open, the flesh is susceptible to bacteria from the surface of the melon. Okay, so this salad has fresh watermelon, honeydew, and cantaloupe. Bacteria pose a threat. There's bacteria on the surface of melons. So we know that's a threat. So the critical control point, melons are prepped, held, and served without cooking. So once we cut into them, then we have to start treating them as a TCS food. The whole melons can be stored at room temperature, but once you cut them and you're going to be holding them, they've got to be kept at a cold temperature. So preparation and holding are going to be the critical control points. Cleaning and drying the melon surfaces during prep would reduce bacteria. So that's going to be the first thing that we do with each of the melons is clean and dry the surface. Holding the sliced melon at the correct temperature, which would be below 41 degrees, helps prevent bacterial growth. So critical limits. Preparation, critical limit is met by washing, scrubbing, and drying the whole melons before they're cut. And then the holding temperature has to be below 41 degrees. Monitoring procedures. Operations team leader should monitor the critical limits. So the team leader should be observing that the melons are being washed and dried. And once they're put into the cooler, the salads are, temperature is taken inside the cooler 3 times throughout the day. Corrective actions. Okay, for melons that were supposedly washed, if the supervisor sees that there's still dirt on them, have them washed again. The leader has to approve them before they're sliced. If the temperature of the salads is above 41 degrees when you're checking it in the cooler, then those have to be thrown out because they've been time temperature reduced. Okay, so verify the system works. We're going to have a HACCP check sheet that the manager can review on a daily basis. Make sure each item is checked and initialed. Everything went the way that we had planned to do it. Confirm all corrective actions have been taken and recorded. You definitely want to know if you have an issue where your melons are temping above 41 degrees and you have to throw out salads, because that means you probably have a problem with your cooler. And then the restaurant evaluates the HACCP system on a quarterly basis, which is every 3 months. So September is the end of the 3rd quarter. So next week we would take a whole look at the whole quarter. Record keeping and documentation. So all of our HACCP records that we have, we're going to keep those on hand for 16 weeks. Okay. We talked about processing methods that require a restaurant to have a variance from the health department. You also need to have a HACCP plan in place for these things. So it's the same list: smoking food is method to preserve it, not just to enhance flavor. So if you are grilling shrimp and then put it in a smoker for a few minutes just to get a smoky flavor on it, that's not preserving it. If you're using food additives like vinegar, if you're pickling vegetables or boiled eggs, and you're going to put them into a sealed jar, you would need a HACCP plan. If you're curing foods or processing like venison for personal use in your restaurant, you would need a HACCP plan. Any foods that use the reduced oxygen package method, so anything that you would be cryovacking, the modified atmospheric packaging, vacuum packed, sous vide cooking. If you're packaging fresh juice on site for sale, unless you have a warning label on it, you would need a HACCP plan. If you're sprouting your own seeds or beans, or if you're offering live shellfish from a display tank, usually that's like a tank of lobster, you would have to have a HACCP plan in place. And that plan has to be read and approved by the local health department. And then when they come in and do inspections, you have to be able to show them your reports. So all of your monitoring methods, all of your corrective action, the invoices for that product, so that they can verify that you're really following your HACCP plan. Okay, so crisis management. You have to have a crisis management program. We just went through a pretty major crisis with the hurricane. Focus, pardon? I'm sorry, I changed the question. Focus on 3 phases: preparing for the crisis, responding to the crisis, and then recovering from the crisis. So you want to have a written plan. Did anybody read the university's hurricane plan before the hurricane? So that's something that was written well over 10 years ago. It wasn't written before Katrina, but it was written shortly after Katrina. So you need to have a written plan. You actually run tests to make sure that your plan is going to work. We have backup generators on our walk-in coolers and freezers, and periodically those are tested. So we cut the power off to make sure the generators are going to come on and stay on. You want to have a crisis management team. The size of the team depends on the size of the operation. Teams for large operations may include numerous functions. So typically, like at the university, there's a lot of different areas outside of academics that you may or may not be aware of. And some of the teams include like the vice president for academics would be there, but also the buildings and facilities manager will be part of that team. We have a safety manager, university police. So there's a lot of people that could be on the team to, depending on what type of crisis you're anticipating. Consider including external resources. So like for restaurants, the local health department can be part of your team. And the companies that supply you with your ingredients, they can have experts about crisis management and recovery. So it's important to have an emergency contact list and posted by phones. A lot of the crises that we would anticipate, you can dial 911 and you're going to be able to get help for a restaurant. But there are a few other places that you need to be able to contact directly. You want to have a crisis communication plan. So like what the university does, it has an email system, it has a text message system, and then the Nichols website is where they put the details as time progresses. You appoint a spokesperson and instruct staff, in the university case, students, to direct questions to the spokesperson. So like the Nichols website had FAQs for students, and it had a survey that everybody could fill out with their major concerns after the hurricane. Assemble a crisis kit, and this is something that you should have ahead of time. So for a foodborne illness outbreak, you have to have a food safety program. You have to identify what you're going to do when things go wrong. Okay. The staff has to be trained on food safety policies and procedures. Create a foodborne illness incident report form. You don't want to wait until somebody calls up and says, I got sick eating at your restaurant. You should have a folder of blank forms with all the information that you want to get from the people. It's recommended you get legal guidance when you develop it. And then you have to train your staff to use that form. So things that should be included on that form: what and when the customer ate at the operation. And what did we say the time period was for onset of symptoms for foodborne illness. There's a range of times. Do you remember how the longest? How many weeks? I think it's 6. Okay, so your symptoms might not be showing up until 6 weeks later. They can happen as early as a few hours after you eat, unless it's an allergy. Allergies can be instant. Going to find out when did your guest get sick, what symptoms they have, how long they experience the symptoms, where and when did the customer seek medical attention, what other food was eaten by the customer. I think it was last week I had sent out the email about the salmonella outbreak. Anybody see any more news about that? Since I emailed that out, the number of people identified with that particular strain of salmonella has doubled. It's been entered into 4 more states. They haven't identified exactly the source, but they're seeing that a lot of these people had eaten cilantro and or lime in that time period. But they haven't put any kind of a recall out. Kind of going that this started in August, and then but cases doubled, like reported cases in September. Okay, so time to respond to the crisis. Gather the crisis management team. We're going to start having meetings about what your plan is. Implement your plan, collect all the information you can, plan courses of action. Okay, regardless of the emergency, there are certain things that we're going to have to do in a restaurant. 2 of the main things are going to be to secure the building and to restore power and store the food safely. Manage events as they unfold. So you may or may not be able to do these things according to your plan, depending on, if you have access to get into the building, or your backup generator doesn't work. Work with the media. Again, you should have a spokesman or spokesperson for your operation that addresses the media. You don't want somebody that's going to be nervous going in front of a television camera and saying that everything's okay and we're going to be ready to serve food, I think today or tomorrow. You want somebody that can communicate clearly. You also have key audiences that you want to focus on. Your regular customers, your stockholders, so anybody that has an investment in your restaurant. It can be a bank or it can be a group of individuals that has lent you money in order to open your restaurant. You need to make sure you're talking with all of those people. And then the community in general. That's typically when you would be talking to television, radio, newspaper reporters. Fix the problem and then communicate what you have done. Anybody know where Bourgeois Meat Market is? You'll need to get there. It's on the way to Houma down Highway 20. It's only like 2 or 3 miles from here. It's not very far. A year or so ago, they had somebody drive a car through the front of their building. Yes. Fine, but like he was like, and it's really weird because it would be like a car driving off the highway. here into the front of our building. You had to like turn, and I think they said it was going over 50 miles an hour. So I'm not sure what caused the vehicle to make an abrupt turn to the left and go into the building. But obviously that's a crisis. Like, you got to make sure that everybody is safe. Nobody was injured when that car came through. I think it was pretty much a miracle because it came through right where people are standing in line to pay for their food. And then it went right through the front wall and window, through the counter, I believe, and the car was just partially outside, but mostly on the inside. But the one thing that I remember very clearly about it was like the next day in the newspaper, they had a picture of the front being all boarded up and fixed and open for operation. So that was like their key message to get out to the community. It's like, yeah, we had this accident here. It was freaky, but everybody in the neighborhood chipped in to get us back to a point where we could operate. So they fixed the problem and got that message out very fast. So how do we respond to a foodborne illness outbreak? So if a customer calls us to report they got a foodborne illness, take the complaint seriously, express concern, do not admit responsibility. Don't say like, oh yeah, you're the 10th person that called today. You had the chicken, right? You're just gonna be very professional when you take this information. Ask them for their contact information. So the first thing you need to get is, how do we get back in touch with you? Complete your foodborne incident, illness incident report form. If there are similar complaints, then you need to get the crisis management team on the job. Identify any common food items to determine the potential source of the complaint. So you want to know what each person ate that is complaining. Because to have an outbreak, they have to eat the same food. So you might have to do some work to identify, especially if you have something like a buffet. And like people might try 10 different items on the buffet. And we hope only one of them is what's making people sick. So if you do see something like, oh, it is the people that ate the fish last night that are getting sick, and there's two or more, then you want to contact the health department and get some help with this. You don't want them to come to you saying that they know you have a problem, because they are there to help you. So if you have suspected food still in the operation, you want to set that aside because you may need to have that food tested. But you do want to make sure that it doesn't get sold. So just like if you have a food recall, you separate it, you mark it, label it, do not use, do not discard. And then have all the information on hand about the product description, any dates or lot numbers that are associated with that product. If possible, obtain samples of the suspect food from the customer. So if they had taken a go box and had some leftovers in their fridge at home, ask them if you can get that back so it can be analyzed. If your outbreak is caused by a sick staff member, so if you had somebody come into work when they shouldn't have been in work, then you've got to take a look at who was working at the same time as this employee that was sick. Interview each of them separately about their health status. Are they having any symptoms of this illness? If the person that is sick, you've got to exclude them from the operation, following all of the guidelines we have about the big six pathogens, the two salmonellas, Shigella, E. coli, hepatitis A, and norovirus. If the regulatory authority confirms your operation is the source of the outbreak, then cooperate fully with them to resolve this crisis. Provide appropriate documentation, temperature logs, HACCP documents, files on your staff showing that everybody was trained to report illnesses and symptoms that they have. To recover from the foodborne illness outbreak, again, you're working with the regulatory authority, clean and sanitize areas of the property. At this point, it contradicts itself and says throw out suspected food, but at this point you're recovering. So you've already determined that you did have an outbreak. The food has been analyzed. Any food that was suspected gets thrown away. We should have known what the cause of the outbreak is at this point. Review our food handling procedures. Was it an issue of a sick employee? Was it an issue of some piece of equipment wasn't holding temperature properly? Did somebody cross-contaminate? What was the actual cause, and what procedures do we need to change to make sure it doesn't happen again? Develop a plan to reassure customers that the food served in your operation is safe. And that's going to be very important. Anybody ever eat at Chipotle? Even after all the foodborne illness outbreaks they've had? Okay. So they have obviously reassured you that it's safe to eat there. And I haven't heard of one lately, so it's probably going to be okay. Imminent health hazards. This is a significant threat or danger to health that requires immediate correction or closure to prevent injury. So if you have something like this, and we'll go through some examples, you need to stop service. Notify your regulatory authority. Throw out any food that's spoiled or contaminated. Any damaged packaging that the food is in. So some of the imminent health hazards include a power outage. So you consider having a backup generator that automatically comes on and makes sure that your coolers and freezers still work. Or you might have a plan in place that you can get a refrigerated trailer on your property within an hour or so in the event that the power goes out, and the food can be put into the refrigerated trailer. And then consider switching to a menu that has items that do not require cooking. So you don't actually need the power to run your kitchen. Also developing a policy about when cooler doors can be opened, because we know that the more you open a cooler, the warmer it gets inside the cooler. Service may be allowed after water and electrical interruptions if the operation has a pre-approved written emergency operating plan. So if you all of a sudden run out of fresh water, the PowerPoint has some tips here. Electrical interruptions, take immediate corrective action on those. You have to notify the health department that you're going to your plan B because of the water or electrical outage. So if the refrigeration equipment stops working, record the time of the power outage, and check and record food temperatures on a periodic basis. So it will take time for the cooler to lose temperature and for the temperature of the food to increase into the temperature danger zone. Keep the cooler and freezer door closed as much as possible. Pack the TCS food and ice bought from an approved reputable supplier. So with a power outage, you could also have the possibility of water loss, or your ice machine's not going to be working, so you won't be able to produce your own ice that is safe. So again, this is something you would want to have an agreement with somebody ahead of time that you're going to be able to get ice from them should you need to do that. Okay, so I'm going to stop here on slide 45 and we will continue next time.